Wasn't $997,000 every month enough? My grandmother asked as she stood in the doorway of my hospital room. I held my newborn daughter close to my chest, wearing the same old grey sweatshirt I had been wearing for the last 2 nights. For a moment, I thought I had heard her wrong. The room smelled of disinfectant, warm plastic, and the sweet scent of a newborn baby. My little girl, Leia, was only a day and a half old. She was sleeping peacefully against me, her tiny fist tucked under her chin. A hospital bracelet was wrapped around her wrist. Her bassinet stood near the window, and the hospital bill lay face down on the table. I had already looked at it 3 times, and each time, my heart raced with worry. My grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, didn't look at the baby first. She looked at me. Her eyes moved over my faded sweatshirt, my worn-out leggings, and the small overnight bag beside my chair. Then she noticed how I had hidden the hospital bill under a magazine, as if covering the paper could make the debt disappear. She looked back at me and asked again, this time more slowly. Was $977,000 every month not enough? I stared at her in complete confusion. My throat felt dry. I hadn't slept properly in 2 days, and my body still ached after giving birth. Grandma, what are you talking about? I whispered. She stepped farther into the room. Her face was calm, almost too calm. I knew that look. It was much more dangerous than anger. I have been sending $977,000 to you on the first business day of every month since your wedding, she said. I thought you were living a simple life by choice. I believed you were carefully building your future. I never imagined this. Her eyes scanned the room again. I looked down at my sleeping daughter before meeting my grandmother's eyes. I never received a single dollar, I said quietly. For a few seconds, everything felt frozen. Sometimes life doesn't fall apart with loud noise. Sometimes it changes so quietly that nothing ever feels the same again. My grandmother didn't cry or look shocked. Instead, she calmly reached into her handbag, took out her phone, and made a call. Diane, she said as soon as someone answered. Come to St. Vincent Hospital immediately. Bring every financial record you can gather within the next hour. She ended the call and looked back at me. If you had just given birth and someone told you that $977,000 a month had supposedly been sent to you for years, would you ask another question or would you completely fall apart? I didn't cry. I couldn't. Shock doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like complete silence. I kept one hand on my daughter's tiny back and listened to the sound of my own heartbeat. Then I started doing the math. $977 every month. We had been married for 73 months. That meant $9 million. $9 million. Yet during the last 4 months of my pregnancy, I had been cutting grocery expenses, refusing extra hospital services, and working late-night inventory shifts at a regional pharmacy because my husband kept saying money was tight. I met Ethan Mercer at a charity dinner in Greenwich. He had the kind of face that made older people call him respectable and younger people call him trustworthy. He worked in private investment, wore expensive suits, and always spoke about money in a calm, confident way. Whenever Ethan talked about finances, everything sounded simple. He used words like cash flow, timing, liquidity, and market cycles. He made every financial problem seem temporary. My grandmother had never fully praised him, but she had never objected either. At the time, that felt like approval. And approval from Eleanor Whitmore meant everything to me. She had built the Whitmore Storage Group with my grandfather from the ground up. Over the years, they turned it into a successful company that owned industrial buildings, medical offices, and valuable commercial properties. Despite her wealth, she never showed it off. She wore simple but expensive clothes, drove an old Range Rover, and signed 6-figure checks as casually as ordering a cup of tea. When Ethan asked me to marry him, I believed I was choosing a man who valued stability and honesty. Now I realize I was confusing control with kindness. The first step happened so naturally that I never questioned it. We should open a joint bank account, Ethan suggested. It will make everything easier. Mortgage payments, groceries, utility bills, insurance, and one day, our baby's savings. Everything in one place. He said he understood banking, fees, and money management better than I did. He sounded so confident that I trusted him completely. I believed he already knew the answers to problems I hadn't even thought about. I had no idea that trusting him would become the biggest mistake of my life. At first, the changes seemed harmless. Ethan said it would be easier if all the banking notifications went to his phone since he had set up automatic payments. When passwords needed updating, they were sent to his email because he had created the online account. Whenever we needed to move larger amounts of money, he insisted on handling it because his bank allowed bigger transfers with fewer delays. Everything sounded practical. Everything sounded reasonable. Then things slowly changed. Whenever I asked about our finances, he never gave me a direct answer. How much money will we have left after paying the mortgage this month? I asked once. He smiled and said, "Don't worry. I've already taken care of everything." Another day, my bank card was declined while I was shopping for baby supplies. "What happened?" I asked. "It's just the bank's fraud protection," he replied. "I fixed it. Just use the other card." One evening, I finally asked the question that had been bothering me. "Are we really doing okay financially?" He kissed my forehead and smiled. "We're fine. You just have to stop thinking like you're single. We're married now. Money works differently." That sentence stayed in my mind for months. Money works differently. He was right. It really did. By the time I was 6 months pregnant, I had quietly lowered my expectations. Not because Ethan forced me. He was much smarter than that. He never demanded I spend less. Instead, he made me believe it was my own choice. I became thankful for having less. I started buying cheaper vitamins instead of the ones my doctor recommended. I put the soft maternity pajamas back on the store shelf and kept wearing my old oversized t-shirts. Whenever we went out to eat, I ordered the cheapest meal and skipped desserts or drinks. I ignored my back pain and told myself I could handle it. I kept saying that women everywhere went through harder pregnancies without complaining. Then I took a second job. A former coworker helped me find overnight inventory work at a pharmacy chain. My job was simple but exhausting. After the store closed, I counted products, scanned shelves, and stood for hours under bright fluorescent lights. The pay wasn't great, but it came quickly. When I told Ethan I had started working extra shifts until things got better, he looked proud. "That's one of the reasons I love you," he said. "You don't give up when life gets hard." Looking back now, those words hurt more than anything. While I was spending my nights counting blood pressure monitors and prenatal vitamins at 2 in the morning, I had no idea my husband was hiding millions of dollars from me. Ethan cared deeply about appearances. He used words like image, reputation, and status. There was always another business dinner, another important client meeting, another golf weekend, or another expensive gift that he claimed was necessary for his career. I stopped questioning it. Then my mother-in-law, Vivian Mercer, started visiting more often. Vivian had a special talent. She could insult someone while sounding polite. She would walk into my kitchen, smile sweetly, and say, "Oh, I like how simple you've kept everything." Or she'd glance at my clothes and add, "Some women completely stop caring about themselves during pregnancy. At least Ethan isn't the type to judge." She always looked perfect. Cream-colored outfits, elegant jewelry, expensive handbags, everything about her seemed carefully planned. She had an opinion about everything. The baby's nursery. Breastfeeding. Which stroller we should buy. Whether I should have a natural birth or schedule an induction. Whether I should quit working completely. Or maybe work even more because, according to her, women with too much free time overthink everything. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She knew exactly how to make someone feel small without sounding cruel. Around the same time, expensive packages started arriving at our house almost every day. Designer shoes. Luxury watches. Tailored shirts. One day, a leather travel bag arrived that probably cost more than I earned in an entire month of working night shifts. When I asked Ethan about it, he smiled. A client gave it to me after closing a deal. Another afternoon, Vivian came over wearing a sparkling new bracelet. When I complimented it, she laughed. "Oh, I found it at an estate sale. I got lucky." Everything always had a neat explanation. Every story sounded believable enough that I pushed my doubts aside. But when you later discover your entire life was carefully staged, you begin asking yourself one question. Do you confront the lie the moment you notice it? Or do you stay quiet long enough to discover how far the deception really goes? I chose to stay quiet. I convinced myself that every marriage goes through difficult seasons. I believed that sometimes one partner carries more of the burden while the other supports them in different ways. Ethan controlled the words. I carried the sacrifices. One Tuesday during my 8th month of pregnancy is a memory I can never forget. I stood in the grocery store, comparing prices on baby formula even though my daughter hadn't been born yet. I had a calculator open on my phone, trying to make every dollar count. I had already removed several items from my cart. A stranger accidentally bumped into me and apologized. I smiled and told them it was fine. That same evening, Ethan posted photos from an expensive steakhouse in Manhattan. He was laughing with 2 clients. A bottle of wine sat on the table. It probably cost more than my monthly car payment. And while I worried about affording baby supplies, my husband was living a life I knew nothing about. I didn't argue with Ethan when he came home that night. I simply looked at him and asked, "How was your trip?" He loosened his tie, gave me a small smile, and replied with one word. Productive. That was all he said. When I reached 36 weeks of pregnancy, my doctor warned me that I needed to stop working the overnight inventory shifts. My blood pressure was getting too high. My feet and ankles were badly swollen. You need to rest, she told me. I promised I would. But a few days later, the electricity bill arrived. The total was so high that it made me feel dizzy. So I accepted one last night shift. At the time, I believed I was protecting our family. I thought we were just a couple going through a difficult season. I believed Ethan was trying his best. I kept telling myself that one day we'd look back and laugh about how hard things had been. Then everything changed. Leah decided she couldn't wait. On a stormy Thursday night, my labor began. Nearly 20 exhausting hours later, my daughter entered the world. She arrived screaming, healthy, and full of life. The moment I held her, I loved her more than I ever thought possible. It felt as if my heart had known her long before we met. Even in the hospital, I kept thinking about money. When the nurse offered extra recovery services, I quietly refused every one of them. A private room. Home visits from a breastfeeding specialist. Extra overnight help with the baby. I turned them all down. In my mind, I could still hear Ethan saying the same words he always used. We just have to get through this quarter. Then my grandmother walked into that hospital room and destroyed every lie I had been living. About 40 minutes after she made her phone call, Ethan arrived. Vivian came with him. Before I even looked up, I recognized Ethan's footsteps. Calm, confident, completely relaxed. He carried a bouquet of flowers. Vivian followed behind him with a light blue gift bag hanging from one arm. Both of them were smiling. They walked into the room like people who believed they were still in control. Then Ethan noticed my grandmother. His smile didn't disappear immediately. It stayed on his face just a little too long. That tiny pause told me everything. Vivian recovered first, as she always did. Eleanor, she said with a pleasant smile. What a surprise. My grandmother didn't even look at her. She stared straight at Ethan. Then she asked quietly, "Where is my granddaughter's money?" Ethan slowly placed the flowers on the windowsill. "I'm sorry," he said calmly. "I'm not sure which money you're talking about." My grandmother's voice stayed perfectly steady. Don't insult my intelligence and waste my time at the same moment. It was the coldest sentence I had ever heard. She continued, "Since the day Naomi married you, I have transferred $300,000 into the household account every single month. You controlled that account. Naomi clearly never had full access to it." She leaned forward slightly. "So I'll ask you once. Where is the money?" For the first time, Ethan looked directly at me. There was no guilt in his eyes. No regret. Only calculation. I could almost see him searching for the safest excuse. It's more complicated than it seems, he said. There were investments, financial obligations, and timing issues. Everything I did was for our family's future. I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but steady. I was counting grocery money. Everyone turned toward me. I worked night shifts while I was pregnant because I thought we couldn't pay our bills. I stood for hours with swollen feet. I refused medical care after giving birth because I believed we couldn't afford it. I felt guilty every time I wanted something as small as a new pair of maternity pajamas. And now you're standing here telling me it was all for our family. The room fell silent. Vivian quickly stepped forward. Naomi, sweetheart, she said softly, you've just had a baby. This really isn't the right time to discuss complicated financial matters. Your hormones are still. Enough. My grandmother finally looked at her. If your name is connected to even $1 of that money, she said, I strongly suggest you stop talking. Vivian froze. She didn't say another word. That was the moment I realized my grandmother suspected something even bigger. She didn't believe Ethan had acted alone. She believed Vivian had been involved from the beginning. My lawyer will be here shortly, my grandmother said. Then she turned to me. You and Leah are coming home with me tonight. Ethan immediately protested. That's not necessary. My grandmother looked at him without any emotion. Your opinion is no longer relevant. That evening, I left the hospital with my grandmother. Not with my husband. I didn't return to the beautiful house with its marble kitchen island, carefully decorated living room, and spotless pantry that Vivian loved to inspect. Instead, I went back to my grandmother's home in Old Greenwich. It was an older house. The wooden floors creaked when you walked across them. The windows were old. Every room smelled gently of cedar wood and fresh tea. For the first time in years, I felt safe. That night, I stayed in the same guest room where I had slept as a child. Leah rested peacefully on my chest while I stared at the ceiling. I replayed the last 2 years of my marriage over and over. The declined bank card. The missing account notifications. The way Ethan always answered every question without actually giving an answer. The expensive business dinners. His endless calm. The way he had slowly trained me to believe asking about money made me childish. The next morning, at exactly 8:15, my grandmother's lawyer arrived. Her name was Diane Rourke. She was 62 years old, slim, sharp-eyed, and dressed in a navy blue suit that looked perfectly pressed. She introduced herself politely, washed her hands, smiled at baby Leah, and said she was beautiful. Then she sat at the dining table. She folded her hands and looked at me. Start from the beginning, she said. And don't leave anything out. So I told her everything. How Ethan and I first met. How he convinced me to open a joint account. How he slowly took complete control of it. How I ended up working overnight shifts while pregnant. How my bank card was declined. How Vivian always seemed to have expensive new things while I struggled to buy groceries. Diane interrupted only to ask precise questions. Who suggested opening the account? Who controlled the main login? When did the banking alerts stop coming to you? Did you ever have your own debit card? At the time, was Ethan involved in a major business deal or receiving large bonuses? When I finally finished speaking, Diane quietly opened a thick folder she had brought with her. It was packed with documents. The stack was so large that, for the first time, I realized this wasn't just a family problem anymore. It was evidence. Diane opened the thick folder and pulled out the first document. She placed it in front of me. These are the monthly transfers from Whitmore Family Holdings, she said. I looked down at the page. There were 30 deposits. Every payment had arrived on time. Every single one had been sent into the household account that Ethan controlled. For a moment, I could barely breathe. A small part of me still hoped there had been some mistake. Maybe the money had gone to the wrong account. Maybe there had been a banking error. Maybe the transfers had been frozen. Anything. Anything except what I was beginning to understand. Then Diane slid another page across the table. This shows what happened after each deposit arrived. I stared at the numbers. Within 2 or 3 days of every payment, Large amounts of money were moved out of the account. Every time, without exception. The money was first transferred into Ethan Mercer's personal investment account. From there, it was sent to another company. The company was called Mercer Strategic Advisory. It was registered in Delaware. According to the records, Ethan was the only owner and person in control. I kept turning the pages. Every date matched. Every transfer followed the same pattern. Looking at those papers felt like watching a map of every lie he had ever told me. There was a system, a routine, a plan. Diane turned another page. There was another person benefiting from this money, she said. She pointed to several transactions. Vivian Mercer was an authorized user on one of the premium credit cards paid through Ethan's investment account. The statements listed luxury hotels, designer stores, spas, first-class travel, jewelry. There was even a consulting payment made to a company that appeared to exist only on paper. Diane looked directly at me. Vivian wasn't simply aware of what was happening. She was enjoying the money herself. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I loved Vivian. I never had. But suddenly I remembered every time she criticized me. Every time she made me feel like I wasn't good enough. Every time she acted as though Ethan carried all the responsibility because I didn't understand money. Every time she walked into my house wearing new designer clothes while I worried about the cost of diapers. I looked at Diane. So they had me living on an allowance, using my own money? She nodded. Yes. Then she reached for one final document. I want you to read this yourself. She handed me several printed pages. It was a transcript taken from a cloud backup connected to a smart speaker in Vivian's kitchen. The speaker had once been linked to Ethan's shared account. Everything had been legally recovered and accurately time-stamped. I started reading. Vivian said, "She still believes this is only temporary." Ethan answered, "She trusts me as long as I stay calm." Vivian laughed. "She'll ask you before she'll ever ask the bank." Then came the sentence I will never forget. Ethan said, "That's why we keep her tired. Not scared, just tired." I couldn't read another word. The pain wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was cold. So cold that I felt frozen. I sat perfectly still because I was afraid that if I moved even a little, I would completely fall apart. They hadn't simply taken my money. They had carefully controlled my trust. They had planned it, managed it, used my love and loyalty like another financial asset. I didn't need to confront them anymore. The evidence was speaking for itself. That same afternoon, Diane filed the legal case. The claims included financial fraud, abuse, theft of assets, and misuse of marital funds. She also filed emergency requests to freeze accounts, preserve financial records, and force banks to release documents connected to the transfers. 2 weeks before all of this, Ethan had signed an $11 million investment agreement with a private capital firm. Diane prepared a short, factual notice explaining that he was now facing serious legal claims. The notice was sent to every company involved in reviewing his business deal. My grandmother quietly read the draft before it was sent. She crossed out one sentence. It described the situation as unfortunate. She shook her head. "This wasn't unfortunate," she said. "It was carefully planned." Diane removed the word immediately. Before dinner that evening, Ethan started calling. Again. And again. And again. I ignored every call. Then the voicemail messages started. "Naomi, please answer. This is all being misunderstood. Your grandmother doesn't understand how these financial structures work. Don't let her destroy our marriage." I still didn't respond. Then came the text messages. I was protecting our future. Everything I did was for our family. You're risking Leia's future because you're emotional and exhausted. I almost laughed when I read that. Emotional and exhausted. For 2 years, he had worked hard to make sure I stayed exactly that way. Now he wanted to use it against me. Within 3 days, the investment company delayed the next stage of Ethan's business deal. 5 days later, they demanded more financial documents. A week later, I had blocked every phone number he normally used. He started calling from unknown numbers instead. Then he made the biggest mistake of all. About 10 days after the lawsuit was filed, Ethan attended a charity finance dinner in Manhattan. It was the kind of event where successful people talked about helping others while trying to impress each other. During the evening, he told several guests that I had suffered a serious mental breakdown after giving birth. He claimed my grandmother had manipulated me during a vulnerable time. He told people I had become paranoid over perfectly normal financial planning. He thought everyone in that room would believe him. He was wrong. One of the guests had known my grandmother for over 30 years. Another served on the hospital foundation board. A third worked at a firm that had once considered investing with the Whitmore family. By the next morning, every word Ethan had spoken had reached Diane. Before lunchtime, she updated the lawsuit. A new claim was added: defamation. She immediately sent the amended filing to the same investors who were already questioning whether Ethan could be trusted with other people's money. That was when everything around him started falling apart. The $11 million investment deal collapsed first. Then the invitations to exclusive events quietly stopped. Business dinners became less frequent. Important introductions disappeared. The network Ethan had spent years building slowly began to distance itself from him. One senior executive resigned from his company. Then another. A wealthy family office withdrew from a planned investment. A lender reviewing one of his loans requested additional fraud disclosures. After that, they stopped returning his calls altogether. In Ethan's world, reputation wasn't about being honest. It was about avoiding risk. The moment people believed he had become a risk, they started walking away. Vivian made one last attempt to fix things. One afternoon, she arrived at my grandmother's house wearing a cream-colored coat and dark sunglasses. Her face carried the perfect expression of sadness. My grandmother never invited her inside. She stood on the front porch while Vivian spoke about family misunderstandings, stress, new motherhood, and the importance of protecting the family's reputation. My grandmother listened without interrupting. Then Vivian said, "We all want what's best for the baby." My grandmother looked at her calmly. "If that were true," she replied, "you would have made sure her mother had enough money to buy groceries." There was nothing left to say. Vivian turned around and left. By the time Leia was 4 months old, my life had become a schedule of court dates, legal papers, and endless financial records. 6 months later, Ethan wasn't trying to prove he was innocent anymore. He was trying to reduce the damage. He wanted smaller penalties. Fewer documents. Less public attention. Anything that could save what remained of his reputation. One night at exactly 11:42, he left me a voicemail. He admitted he had made mistakes. He said the pressure of providing for our family had changed him. He told me he still loved me. He even said he hoped that one day I would understand that he had never meant to hurt me. Strangely, that message hurt almost more than the lies. Even his apology sounded carefully planned. Every word seemed chosen to make himself look better. I saved the voicemail. Not for myself. For Leia. One day she may ask me what kind of man her father was. If that day comes, I don't want to answer with anger. I want her to hear his own voice and decide for herself. When Leia was 7 months old, I moved into a small white house only a few streets away from my grandmother. It wasn't fancy. The front porch was narrow. The front door stuck every time it rained. Every morning, sunlight filled the kitchen and made even a simple cup of coffee feel special. For the first time in years, it truly felt like home. I returned to work part-time for a medical non-profit organization. I opened bank accounts in my own name. I managed every dollar myself. No one else had access. The first time I bought myself a warm winter coat without feeling guilty, I sat in my car afterward and cried. Then I laughed. I realized I had spent years asking permission without anyone actually speaking. The voice had been living inside my own mind. One Saturday morning, my grandmother came over for coffee. Leia was lying on a blanket in the living room, happily kicking a stuffed rabbit while laughing at the ceiling fan. We watched her together in comfortable silence. After a while, my grandmother quietly said, "I should have handled everything differently." I knew exactly what she meant. She wished she had placed the money in a protected trust. She wished she had created separate accounts that no one else could control. She wished she had built stronger safeguards. "You were only trying to protect me," I said. She looked into her coffee before answering. "I thought I was giving you freedom." Then she sighed. "Instead, I gave the wrong man access." It was a real apology. Not the kind people make to escape responsibility. The kind that tells the truth, even when it hurts. She continued softly. "I trusted your marriage because you trusted it. And I let that trust replace careful attention. You paid the price for my mistake. I'm sorry." My throat tightened. "I didn't see it either," I whispered. She nodded. "That's why it worked." Neither of us spoke for several minutes. We didn't need to. These days, I don't think about Ethan very often. Healing didn't arrive because I forgave him. It happened little by little. First, I thought about him less often. Then the memories stopped hurting as much. One morning, I realized an entire week had passed without hearing his voice inside my head. That moment meant more to me than winning any lawsuit. Sometimes I think about the woman I used to be. The woman who stood under bright store lights at 8 months pregnant, counting inventory because she believed she had to save her marriage. She wasn't weak. She wasn't foolish. She had been carefully manipulated by people who knew exactly how much pressure she could take without fighting back. That difference matters. Shame tells us we should have known better. The truth is different. Sometimes people slowly build a prison around you without you realizing it. My grandmother was wrong about one thing. She believed money alone could keep me safe. It couldn't. But she was right about something much more important. One brave decision can change an entire life. That day in the hospital, she didn't give me revenge. She gave me a chance to escape. She stopped the lies before they destroyed everything I had left.